Hello and good night, good evening. Time is weird. Also, I have just realized I have not created the thing for today, so hang on a second. Oh gosh. All right, let's turn that down. I really don't want to hear myself like that, especially on a delay. What was I doing? Now I've forgotten what I was doing. I was doing this. Paste properties. I need to rename that. There we go. All right. How has everyone been? I hope everyone has been okay. It has been very cold and wintry, which I know it's still February, so that's normal. But also, I am not a creature made for cold. I was made for 80 degrees and up. um, but yeah. Also, today's topic is probably gonna get a little rambly. Um, Also, I think I've mentioned once before that I don't read reviews before I read these books. I read if I say I'm doing a blind read, I'm doing a true blind read. I might have a recommendation from someone, like with Assassin's Apprentice. It was a gift from a friend who really liked it and was like, "Here, read this." Um, but for the most part, I go into these blind when they are first time reads. And when I typically see the reviews is when I'm going digging around for book covers, typically. Because one of the first places I stop to look for book covers is Goodreads, which is where I try to figure out, hey, are there multiple covers? And if there are, then I go digging for the illustrator. And if I can find the illustrator, that's when I include them. Um, Somehow this book has the weirdest set of mixed reviews I've seen in a while. Because for all of the 4 and 5 star, oh, this book is amazing, there are a lot of 1 and 2s. And I am biased on this because I'm a huge fan of ancient Egypt. So there's in the author's note at the end, it makes a comment of the author said that when she was 7, she wanted to be an Egyptologist, and I don't know how old I was when I phased from, oh, I want to do ballet or gymnastics or be in the Olympics. That was never a true goal, but I watched the Olympics, so I could do that. Totes. Um, and then I found, I don't even remember how we got onto ancient Greece, which led me directly to ancient Egypt. Do not pass go, do not collect $200, go directly to ancient Egypt. And I fell in love. And I absolutely wanted to go to Egypt. I wanted to study it. I wanted to, like, it wasn't even from a, it was one of those situations where I had read the myths. I had um, I had been gifted basically textbooks about Egypt when I was a kid, because I was so into ancient Egypt. When like museum exhibits came through, we would go see that because I was into it. I lost my Ma'at pin from one of those exhibits, which makes me sad because I really liked that pin. Um, but I've always had a fascination with it. And then this past year, and I will say this again later, but I'm gonna say it now. This past year, Overly Sarcastic Productions here on YouTube put out a thing about mummies, which, I don't really care about the mummies as monster, but then they put out a second one that was about like the research that went into that video, and that I was way more interested in because it had more to do with Egypt, even though a later Egypt than I was typically interested in. It was still interesting because of the ties back to the ancient. And then reading this book because I needed I needed something to palate cleanse. And it wasn't until I was like 15 chapters in that I realized I've read something by this author before, and that if I had known that going in, I might not have picked this book up, and I'm so glad I didn't know that because I really enjoyed it. So with all that being said, let's get into this because I will go off the rails just talking about Egypt and the things I like about ancient Egypt and what I really enjoyed about this book. And I may have to change the description on this because I have it listed as slightly spoilery, and I'm hoping I can stay in that vein. Here's hoping. So we are talking about What the River Knows. As per usual, this is meant to entertain and inform. I don't hold any of the rights to the works described, and I hope you enjoy. Also, for anyone wondering, I have forgotten how to do Inyas and tildes in in Google Slides. So if you're like, why aren't the accents on the names? It's because I've forgotten how to do that. So this is What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez. It was originally published in 2023 by Wednesday Books. It is the first book in the duology of Secrets of the Nile. I am going to attempt to hold off on reading the second one until we get around to Sequel Summer, because I think I want to do Sequel Summer again this year. But to be completely honest, I own the second one already, and I kind of just want to go pull it off the shelf and read it. Because I enjoyed this book. This has been the first blind read that I've really enjoyed in a while. And I also am aware that people might not like it, and that's fine. How did the author describe it? Hang on, let me... I always take the dust jackets off, but I keep them nearby. Oh, see, I haven't actually read that, so okay. How the author described it doesn't really apply to me because I haven't read one of the things that she refers to. So this is the original cover, which is by Michaela Alciano, who is a Hugo Award finalist. She has worked for a lot of publishing houses, including Penguin Random and HarperCollins, and has been freelance since 2019. She has done variant covers for The Night Circus and The Luminaries, but her style is fairly fluid, and by that I mean I scrolled through, I think, everything on her page, and there were some of them where I'm like, oh, these are distinctly similar. The way she does the crocodiles. There are other books that have either alligators or crocodiles in them that have very similar vibes to these. And I don't know if it's because this is how she draws crocodiles or if it's because this is how, in general, crocodiles are drawn. So we have covered her illustration before, and that was a variant cover for the Luminaries when I talked about the Luminaries. I really enjoy it. But like I said, her style is very fluid. So outside of like series, they may not match. So like some of them are heavy in florals and others are not. And why does this tea smell so weird? This is very strange. This is mango tea. And I've had it before, but it smells weird today. And I don't know why. Sorry. I'm getting distracted. And about the author. She has a website that requires a password. So I can't look at her website. But she's a historical fantasy author. She's written several novels. And I say several because the places I found said anywhere from 10 to 12, but when I started looking at titles, some of the titles were duplicate. So we're gonna say several. At least 7. I think I counted 7. I will say the other book I read of hers, and this is going to sound terrible of me, I should have loved it. It was set in fantasy Spain. It was about dragons and dancing, and was fabulous, and I didn't enjoy it. Kind of at all. Despite the fact that it had all of these things that I should have enjoyed, I did not enjoy it. That being said, that's a me problem. And I'm pretty sure the reason I didn't enjoy that one and I did enjoy this one is because while both books were multilingual, this book had 3 different languages other than English in it. And the words used are most in this book, in What the River Knows, are primarily single words or phrases that you can easily get via context clues. And what was the other one? Together We Burn would have like whole paragraphs in Spanish, and context clues can only get you so far when I don't know the language. So while I could and did look it up and get the gist, it broke my reading experience. Let me put it that way. So for better or for worse, that book kind of didn't work for me because I kept being taken out of it. This one didn't have that problem, despite also having multiple languages. Anyway, I wish I could say more about the author, but all of the author's blurbs match what's in the back of the book, which is basically she has written other books and I think currently lives in North Carolina. Is it North Carolina? Yes. And she likes dogs and books. So we're gonna continue on. So what do you need to know about this? This is a historical fantasy. It is an adventure novel. It is full of sass, and there is romance. We will talk about the romance because if this isn't your first time, if this is your first time, hi, I'm Lady Cressius, and I don't typically enjoy romance at all. However, I am aware that a lot of people do, and it's in a lot of books. When we get to that slide, I will talk about why it didn't bother me in this one. So, your main character, you've got 2, sort of, but it's more like 1.2 than 2 full ones. So you have Inez Oliveira, who belongs to a wealthy family with a good name in Buenos Aires, though her parents spend 6 months of the year in Egypt. She's internally petty and impulsive. And I say that with all the love in the world for this character because I understood where that was coming from. It was very believable for a very privileged person to still be like, but I don't have what I want. I don't have my parents with me. They won't take me with them. All of this stuff. I understand where that, like, petty needling bit came from. Um, but the worst of that stays in her head. So she has a very sharp tongue. She is very stubborn, but most of the actual pettiness stays in her head. Um, I will we'll get to the sass later, but I feel like her sass and her pettiness are two different things. And since you're in her head, you hear both. It's important to note what actually comes out of her mouth versus how she thinks about things. And then you have Whitford Hayes, who I call him a tag-on point of view. He's at the end of some of the chapters. They're about a page, usually less, but it's a really nice look from the other side. So something about this book, and I'll get to it on the adventure screen, is everybody has an agenda. And very few people's agendas line up. So everybody has a personal reason to be doing what they're doing. Which, like, is true of most books, but in this one there's a lot to it. So this is a historical fantasy. It is set during the mummy craze, and ancient Egypt, because you've got some fun flashbacks. But also because the fascination with ancient Egypt is how the mummy craze worked. So, the art of creating magic, which the fantasy part of this historical fantasy, has been lost, but magic still clings to old things. If you aren't familiar with the mummy craze, please go watch or listen at the very least to OSP's. You can either listen to their mummy one, which is like on the story of the mummy from like spooky perspective, or you can listen to Red basically tell Blue about her research for it, which is the part I found fascinating because of the history that's buried in that. Because if I haven't said it before, I'm not a huge history buff, except where basically history and mythology kind of overlap and bleed into each other, and therefore the history becomes interesting. So if the history becomes interesting, then I care. But so this falls into that space within the book itself. So outside of the actual history part, we are told that magic is rare except in very old things. So that is established back in Buenos Aires, and it's established that it's not super common, but some very old things still have magic. And then you spend 99% of the book in Egypt, surrounded by very old things. and going through, like, looking for tombs and looking for more old things. So magic is more uncommon than rare. So to take it from, like, a video game perspective, if you have gray is common, green is uncommon, blue is rare, purple is super rare, and gold is legendary, or whatever. For most of the world, it would be blue, it would be rare. In Egypt, it's green. It's uncommon. And not all of the magic things are big magic. In fact, you see one or two items that can be considered big magic. Most of it is small. There's like a sandal that can be used as a flashlight, so small magic. But the other thing about this is that at the whim of the magic itself, magic can latch onto people instead of things. So it transfers from a thing to a person. But there's not a true explanation of why that happens, because it isn't a common enough phenomenon anywhere for there to basically be a definitive reason for that to happen. So, excuse me. The running drive of this, and this is where the spoilery bit comes in, is the search for Cleopatra the Seventh, specifically her tomb. I adore Cleopatra the Seventh. When I was getting into ancient Egypt, I had the Royal Diaries series. I only had 2 books. I had Mary Queen of Scots and I had Cleopatra the Seventh. And so I've always been fascinated with that. I've been fascinated with her being a Greek pharaoh, the Shakespeare of it all, the Mark Antony and Cleopatra, her intelligence and defiance, and like she's a very interesting historical figure who is like, we know she existed, we know all of these facts about her, we know she was super smart, but also there's so much we don't know. So it's not unusual that this book takes a similar approach of basically 2 parts history, 3 parts myth. And part of that is because it's a historical fantasy novel, and part of that is because history is fuzzy, and sometimes history tries to erase people, and many times the people history tries to erase don't go quietly. So this is an adventure story. By all accounts, it should be a mystery what happened to Inez's parents. But it really doesn't feel like that. It feels more like The Mummy or Indiana Jones, in that the question is the push for adventure. What happened to the parents is why she walks out the door. It is her driving force, and it never drops. But this does not feel like a mystery. It feels like Indiana Jones. It feels like it was written with either a movie or a video game in mind, because a lot of the parts that aren't inside Inez's head feel like big set pieces. We're on the Nile. We're in the hotel, whose name escapes me right now. It could easily be a Nathan Drake type of video game where your story is on rails, but there's a lot of things to see and do and look around, and intrigue and twists and all of these things that should add up to a mystery, but it doesn't feel like a mystery. It feels like an adventure. Absolutely. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones could be here. So the sass of it all. Most people in this book have attitudes and sharp edges. And by that I mean both the primary characters and 90% of the side characters. Excuse me. There is one gentleman who shows up fairly late in the book who is an absolute sweetheart, and we love him, and he is highly intelligent and has no sharp edges at all. He is deeply understanding, and it makes you kind of like him more because he's so different from everybody else. So the verbal sparring isn't the wittiest. It's not the most intelligent. This is specifically like between anyone, but especially between Wit and Inez. It does feel like how 2 people with differing agendas, and many times conflicting agendas, would needle each other as they each tried to achieve their own objective. When you first meet Wit, his entire goal is to get Inez, who just got off the boat from Argentina, back on the boat to Argentina. So, if that dynamic doesn't start out adversarial, I don't know what else you would call it. But they poke and prod and needle, but also they weirdly understand each other. And I say weirdly not because it's unusual for them to, but because, excuse me, because they have such a different drive, you'd think they wouldn't understand each other, and they do. I appreciate the sass. I appreciate the sharp edges, even though I don't always like the people involved. Like, did some of it fall into the trope of just have a conversation and all of this would make sense? Yes, of course. That's like 90% of all stories ever. But with all of the secrets and agendas working around each other, you very much can understand why they wouldn't have that conversation. It is not unreasonable in Egypt when all of the colonial powers were basically telling the Egyptians that they didn't have the right to their own history, that people who were with various factions would maybe not try to advertise A, which faction they were with, and B, what they actually wanted. Because if you didn't know, that was a real thing that happened and is very much reflected in this novel. And it's really dumb that it happened. Like, I absolutely do believe that the Egyptians have a right to their own history. But, like, one of the things that comes up pretty early is the illegal selling of artifacts out of the museum itself to tourists to leave the country with. And it's like, yeah, that's a thing that actually happened. And, like, around the world, and in Britain in particular, mummies were used as medicine and paint and other things, and that is absolutely bonkers to me. But it's a true fact. People are weird. And then the romance of it all. So, the romance is not the point of the book. I was deeply thankful for this. If you are looking for a romance, this is not a book about romance. It is there. I was aware of it being there. I was aware that it was a secondary plot thread. I was aware that there was a will you, won't you, will they, won't they, push, pull, will these people mesh or not, blah, blah, blah. You know, the normal romancy things that people want in a romance. But because it wasn't the main point of the book, and because every time it seemed like Inez was going to get distracted by romance, she would, like, wrench herself back onto, no, I'm here for a reason. That reason is what happened to my parents. I didn't mind. It wasn't the main focus. Like, it kept popping up as a distraction for the main character. And then having it continually turned aside because that's what it was. It was a distraction. It doesn't detract from the plot. It serves as more of a as more of a knife twist, more of a turn of a screw. It added some extra stakes in later chapters, but I didn't mind it. If you're going into this looking for a romance, that's not really what this is about. The other thing is, we learn in the very first chapter that Inez has an arranged marriage waiting for her, basically. So whenever she decides to take that offer, it's there. It has already been arranged by her mother back home. So the fact that we're told that out of the gate, the fact that romance isn't the point, I am far more willing to put up with a romantic subplot that doesn't detract from the main plot than I am to put up with a romantic subplot that overtakes the main plot. So I enjoyed it. I know because the author herself compares it to at least the book jacket. I don't know if she wrote that description, but at least the book jacket compares it to The Mummy. You may expect like that dynamic. It's not that dynamic. Do not go into this expecting, Brendan Fraser mummy romantic subplot. That's not what this is. It's very different. Don't expect that. It's not even like Indiana Jones romance, because that's its own different problem. But yeah. Excuse me. So recommendations. I only have this one page of recommendations today, because I mean, other than listing every book on ancient Egypt, so historical fantasy, Sphinx's Princess, because I had to list at least one other book on ancient Egypt, by Esther Frasner, is part of the Princesses of Myth series. It is regarding Nefertiti, I believe. Not Nefertiri. No, not Nefertiri. Nefertiti. It's the first in a duology. Yeah. Wait, are the princess books the first one? Hang on. All of the Princesses of Myth have a book that has princess in the title, and I can never remember. If I go here. Sphinx's Princess. Princesses of Myth. Tell me what the next book in the series is, please. Okay, so the first book is The Princess. Okay. Oh, I didn't know that one actually came out. Anyway, moving on. I'm going to close that page, or I'm going to go down a rabbit hole. There we go. So that one is a lot of fun. It's another historical fantasy that's heavy on the Egyptian history, but also takes some liberties. If you've read a bunch of books and read a bunch of the theories of the historical figures and the actual histories of some of these historical figures, they don't line up perfectly because it's fiction. Much like Helen of Troy is sometimes painted as a villain and sometimes painted as a hero, based off of the perspective the book is written, characters are written differently. Splendors and Glooms by Laura Amy Schultz is, I've talked about it before, it's the one that, I believe it's set in England? Oh, I think that one's set in England. I had looked all of these up so I could. It's the one where the girl gets turned into a doll. It's the one that falls under, in my opinion, it falls under children's horror. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern is more of a alternate world than historical fantasy. It's less historical, more fantasy, but it does take place during real world times, although not during actual, like, our world timelines, because there are some differences between the two. But it is set against a historical backdrop. And there's magic all over the place, and I adore it, and it's wonderful, and the whole circus is magic, and read the Night Circus. Also, the cover illustrator for this book has also done alternate covers for Night Circus, so go look into that. And then Ruby Red by Kirsten Geyer is a time travel fantasy. I have opinions on this book. I recommend it because it does have the romance element that is more lacking in this book. If you're looking for a romance, it's more in that. It's also from the era of overlooked girl gets all the magic power and is fantastic debutante, swishy dresses, is kind of good at everything in a Mary Sue, but also doesn't know anything and gets knocked down a peg, but doesn't really. It falls in that group. I know that's a very negative portrayal. I know a lot of people really enjoyed this series. I think I read the first 2 out of 3. The book covers were pretty. If I remember correctly, there was too much romance in these for me, and the main character grated on my nerves. That being said, a lot of people enjoy these books. I'm not one of them, but that doesn't mean they're poorly written. And on that note, allow me to nerd out about the Egypt of it all. What the River Knows is kind of, not exactly, but if I was going to write a how do I explain this? It's the kind of book that if I had never gone down the path of reading heavy fantasy and high fantasy and just almost pure fantasy more than anything else, it's the kind of book I would have read. Back when I was still reading animal books, and therefore also I was reading like animal books and also like the American Girl books at the same time, so there was like history mixed in, and a lot of animal books also have history mixed in. This is the kind of book I would have read, but this one also has magic, and it's really nice. And I will say, I think part of the reason this one pulled me in so hard was because of the Egypt of it all. Like I said, I adore Cleopatra the Seventh. I adore ancient Egypt. I adore learning about the myths, the history of Egypt in the 1880s time period. All of this stuff is interesting to me, and when I talked about Curious Tides and I said the world was interesting and the characters weren't, and they made it hard to read about, I didn't have that problem with this book. A, the characters were more interesting. B, I'm already invested. It's ancient Egypt. It's the mummy craze. I'm already invested in that time period, in the things that are going on, and the types of stories that are being told. Inez was great. Was she dumb about some things? Sure. Was she too trusting in some ways? Also, yes. Did she travel alone from Argentina to Egypt? Yes. And considering she was part of high society, that wasn't a good thing. But also, she got away with it. What I'm saying is, I liked this book because everything was set up for me too. If the romance had been heavier, I still think I would have liked the book, as long as the Egypt and Cleopatra of it all had still been involved. It would have taken a lot more for me to get bored of this book. This was like this is a book where I am having to tell myself to wait for the sequel because I want to just go grab it off my bookshelf and read it. Because I adore the setting, and unless the book goes to another setting, which I desperately hope it doesn't, I'm still set up to love it. And I find it a little funny because, like I said, the author's other book that I read, Together We Burn, I think that's the name of it. Hang on. It's one of her big ones, so it should be on this. Yeah, Together We Burn. It's so nice when the other book I've read is big enough to be on the dust jacket. Everything should have been set up for me to love that one. But my problem was I kept getting pulled out by the language barrier. This one I didn't have a language barrier. So the things that would pull me out, there were far fewer of them. I will say, to be honest, having skimmed some of the reviews today, a lot of people didn't like the romance aspect. A lot of people thought Inez was dumb. I didn't have that problem. I didn't go into this expecting it to be a romance, and I found Inez to be fine. I didn't mind her. Like, I've read books with worse protagonists, and I've read books with better protagonists, and honestly, coming off of Curious Tides, you really would have had to try very hard to give me a more boring protagonist. And maybe that's not fair. Maybe... Oh. My rigging's not great. Oh well. Maybe that's not fair. Maybe I could be more critical of Inez. But I'm not. Like I said, the fact of the matter is she's in Egypt, and that time period, that location, that's all right up my alley and things I am interested in. Like I said earlier, go watch the Overly Sarcastic Productions thing about mummies. It's a lot of fun if you want stuff about Egypt. But yeah, excuse me. Huh. That was my my book for this time. I will say that coming off of the roller coaster, low that was Curious Tides to high that was What the River Knows, I suspect there's going to be another dip. I need to look. Let me double check. Let me check something right quick. Hang on. 'Cause I think if I go here and then view here and go here. That's not what I wanted. Hang on. Let me find... Is it here? let's see. Content live. Okay. Okay. So not March. Okay, that should be doable, and I can plan around that. I was checking to see. I may do something fun in April, for the first week in April, because that'll be 2 years. And so I think that'll be fun. But I need to look and see, because last time when I did Sequel Summer, I already did the sequel to the very first book I ever talked about, which was a duology, the first book in a duology. So I'm going to have to come up with something else. I may do an epic poem. If I do, that may not be on the Wednesday. I may have to do an extra stream for that. Because, surprise, surprise, epic poems are long. Unless we want to replace one of my basic, because I basically stream twice a month, 3 times if the weeks work that way. But unless we wanted to replace one of those with an epic poem, I think I would have to do an extra stream. But yeah, so probably Sequel Summer. I'll have to figure out what I'm reading for next time. Part of me wants to go back to find, like, should I read Squire's Tales? I love that series. I deeply love that series. And I've been trying to avoid the series that, like, I absolutely adore. If you're wondering why I haven't done any Tamora Pierce or like Deed of Paxenarian or any of the ones that I've like talked about ad nauseum, that's why. There's a reason. I may do an Anne McCaffrey. I may do that. I may do Anne McCaffrey. I may. There's a handful of Anne McCaffrey books off the top of my head that I could pull. I may do that. We may do one that is fondly familiar but not. I don't hold it quite as dear as some of the others. But yeah, let me know if you want me to do an epic poem in April, or as an extra stream, or if you want me to replace one of my usual streams and like going forward until we complete it, do it that way. It's kind of nuts to think that in April it'll be 2 years. But yeah, that would be all of 2023 and all of 2024. Yeah, so I hope you have a good night. If you like Egypt, I highly recommend this book. And I'll see you in 2 weeks.